The bank manager's eyes flickered with something close to pity as he slid the loan papers back across his mahogany desk, and Hannah Owens understood in that devastating moment that her father's signature at the bottom meant absolutely nothing now that he was 6 feet under the hard California soil. She stood there in the Yuba City First National Bank on a sweltering July afternoon in 1883, her black mourning dress clinging to her spine, watching her entire future crumble like the dried earth outside. "Miss Owens, I understand your predicament, truly I do," Mr. Hartwell said, his jowls quivering with what she supposed he thought was compassion. "But your father's debts exceeded the value of your ranch by nearly $3,000. Without a male relative to co-sign, without a husband to guarantee repayment, I simply cannot extend any further credit. The bank has standards to uphold." Hannah's fingers tightened on the leather portfolio containing every document her father had ever signed, every promise he'd made in ink that now carried no more weight than the dust devils spinning down Main Street. "My father built that ranch from nothing. 20 years of his life are in that land. I can run it just as well as he did." "I'm sure you believe that, dear." The condescension in his voice made her jaw clench. But believing and doing are two different things. A woman alone, trying to manage cattle and horses, the board would never approve it. Now, if you were to marry, perhaps your husband could present a more viable business plan. She wanted to throw every single paper in his smug face. Instead, she gathered her documents with trembling hands, her father's signature mocking her from every page. John Owens had been a good man, an honest man, but he'd also been a trusting fool who'd loaned money to neighbors who never repaid him, who'd co-signed notes for friends who'd disappeared, who'd believed that hard work and integrity were enough. They weren't. Not when a heart attack struck you down at 52, leaving your daughter with nothing but worthless promises and hungry creditors. The July heat struck her like a physical blow as she stepped onto the wooden boardwalk. Yuba City bustled around her with indifferent energy. Wagons rattled past, kicking up clouds of dust. Men in work-stained clothes loaded supplies outside the general store. Women in sunbonnets gossiped near the dressmaker's shop, their eyes sliding toward Hannah with that particular mixture of sympathy and satisfaction that came from witnessing someone else's misfortune. She'd been one of them just 3 months ago, back when her father was alive and their ranch was prosperous and her future seemed certain. Back when her signature alongside his father's meant something, when banks welcomed the Owens name. Now she was the pitied spinster, 23 years old with no prospects and diminishing options. Hannah walked toward the hitching post where her mare waited, but a commotion near the saloon caught her attention. A crowd had gathered, men mostly, shouting and jeering at something she couldn't quite see. She should have kept walking. Proper women didn't linger near saloons, didn't involve themselves in street altercations, but she'd stopped caring much about propriety the day her father died. She pushed through the outer ring of spectators and saw 2 men in the center of the circle. One was sprawled in the dust, blood streaming from his nose, while the other stood over him with coiled readiness, his fists still raised. The standing man was tall and lean, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days' worth of stubble shadowing his jaw. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, revealing sun-bronzed skin, and his knuckles were split and bleeding. "That's what you get for cheating at cards, Dawson," someone in the crowd shouted. The man on the ground spat blood. "I didn't cheat. Wade's just a sore loser." "I counted 3 aces up your sleeve before I even called you out," the standing man said, his voice carrying a rough edge that spoke of exhaustion and barely contained fury. "And I gave you a chance to walk away." Hannah recognized the man on the ground now. Rick Dawson, a ranch hand who'd worked for her father 2 summers ago before John Owens had fired him for stealing. The standing man she didn't know, but something about the weary set of his shoulders, the way he looked ready to fight but desperately hoping he wouldn't have to, struck a chord in her chest. "Somebody get the sheriff," a merchant called out. The dark-haired man's jaw tightened. "No need for that. I'm leaving." He turned and nearly collided with Hannah, who'd stepped forward without quite meaning to. His eyes met hers, and she found herself looking into the most startling blue gaze she'd ever encountered, like Colorado sky trapped in a weathered face that couldn't have been much older than her own 23 years. "Excuse me, madam," he said, tipping his hat to her even though it was battered and dust-covered. Then he pushed through the crowd and headed toward a gray horse tied outside the saloon. "That's Flynn Wade," someone near Hannah muttered. "Heard he's been drifting through looking for work. Probably move on now that he's caused trouble." Hannah watched the man mount his horse with fluid grace despite what had to be aching ribs and bleeding knuckles. Flynn Wade. The name settled into her mind with unexpected weight. He gathered his reins and rode north out of town, and she found herself wondering where he was going, if he had anyone waiting for him, if he was as alone as she felt. She shook herself and returned to her mare. She had her own problems to solve, not the least of which was figuring out how to save her ranch before the bank seized it at the end of August. 6 weeks. That's all she had. 6 weeks to prove that her signature could mean something, that she was more than just a woman without a man's name to shelter behind. The ride back to the ranch took 30 minutes through rolling golden hills dotted with oak trees. The land was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. The summer had been dry, the Feather River running lower than usual, and water was becoming a concern for all the ranchers in the area. Her father had sunk a good well 5 years back, deep enough that it rarely ran dry, which made their property valuable. Unfortunately, it also made it desirable to men like Clayton Mercer, who owned the massive Circle M ranch bordering their property to the east. Mercer had made an offer on the Owens ranch the week after her father's funeral, standing in her parlor with his hat in his hands, and sympathy dripping from his tongue like honey from a comb. The offer had been insulting, less than half what the land was worth, and when she'd refused, his sympathy had evaporated like morning dew. "You'll regret turning me down," he'd said, his affable mask slipping to reveal the ruthless businessman beneath. "A woman can't hold land like this. You'll lose it within the year, and when you do, I'll buy it from the bank for even less." She'd shown him the door, but his words haunted her because they echoed what everyone else thought, what the bank manager had essentially told her this afternoon. "Your signature is worthless. Your word means nothing. You're just a woman." The ranch house came into view, a simple 2-story structure her father had built with his own hands when he first claimed this land. The barn needed repairs, the fences needed mending, and she was down to just 2 ranch hands since she couldn't afford to pay more. Miguel and his son Carlos had stayed on more out of loyalty to her father's memory than faith in her ability to run the place, though they never said so directly. She found them working in the corral, training a young colt. Miguel looked up as she approached, his weathered face creasing with concern. "How did it go at the bank?" "About as well as a fox in a henhouse," Hannah said, dismounting. "They won't extend credit. They want the full payment by the end of August, or they'll foreclose." Miguel removed his hat and ran a hand through his graying hair. $3,000 in 6 weeks. "Miss Hannah, that's impossible, unless we sell everything, and even then we'd barely break even." "I know." She unsaddled her mare, needing to keep her hands busy before frustration turned to tears. "But there has to be a way. If we could get the cattle to market in Sacramento, if we could break and sell those wild horses up in the north pasture, if we could find buyers for the equipment we don't absolutely need." "That's a lot of ifs," Carlos said quietly. He was 19, strong and capable, but even his youth couldn't make up for the fact that they were 3 people trying to do the work of 10. "I'm aware." Hannah led her mare into the barn, breathing in the familiar scent of hay and leather and horse. This was her home, the only one she'd ever known. Her mother had died when Hannah was 8, leaving just her and her father to build a life here. She'd learned to ride before she could read, learned to rope and brand and doctor sick cattle. She knew this land, understood the rhythms of ranch life as intimately as her own heartbeat. But none of that mattered to men like Hartwell at the bank or Mercer waiting to swoop in like a vulture. That night she sat at her father's desk surrounded by ledgers and papers and mounting desperation. She'd gone through every possibility, every asset they had. The cattle would bring maybe $800 if she could get them to market, but that required hiring drovers and paying for transport. The horses might bring another $500 if she could break them properly, but that took time and skill in more hands than she had. The equipment was worth something, but not enough. No matter how she calculated it, she came up short. Her father's signature stared up at her from a dozen different documents, bold and confident, the signature of a man who'd believed his word meant something. Now it was just ink on paper, as worthless as her own would be. She pressed her palms against her eyes, fighting the tears that threatened. She wouldn't cry. Crying solved nothing. She needed a plan, needed to figure out how to turn worthless signatures into something solid and real and valuable. The next morning, she rode into town before dawn to catch the Sacramento-bound train, hoping to negotiate directly with cattle buyers there. If she could secure a good price, she might be able to leverage that into a short-term loan. It was a desperate gamble, but desperation was all she had left. The train station was nearly empty at this hour. Just the ticket agent half asleep behind his window and a few travelers waiting on the platform. Hannah purchased her ticket and settled onto a bench, watching the eastern sky lighten from black to indigo to pale rose. Heading to Sacramento? She looked up to find Flynn Wade standing a few feet away, his saddlebag slung over one shoulder. He looked marginally better than he had yesterday, his face cleaned up, though bruises darkened his jaw. His blue eyes held a wariness that suggested he wasn't sure if she'd welcome conversation or tell him to move along. "I am," she said, curiosity overriding caution. "You?" "Same." He gestured to the empty space on the bench. "Mind if I sit? My ribs are reminding me that standing isn't my favorite activity right now." She nodded, and he lowered himself onto the bench with a barely suppressed wince. Up close, she could see the split in his lower lip, the scrapes on his knuckles, the way he held himself like every movement cost him. "You won that fight," she observed, "but it doesn't look like you feel victorious." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Winning a fist fight in the street isn't much of a victory, just means I'm not the one bleeding in the dirt. Doesn't change the fact that I need work and just made myself unwelcome in another town." "Is that why you're leaving? I thought you were looking for ranch work around here." He studied her for a moment, those blue eyes thoughtful. "I was. But after yesterday, I figure my reputation's shot. Men don't want to hire someone with a temper, and I can't say I blame them, so I'm heading to Sacramento. See if the bigger city has more opportunities. Fresh start and all that." He paused. "I'm Flynn Wade, by the way, in case you didn't catch that during yesterday's spectacle." "Hannah Owens." She offered her hand, and he shook it gently, his palm calloused but his grip careful, as if he was conscious of his own strength and her relative delicacy. "Owens, Walms," he repeated. "Any relation to John Owens, who had that ranch north of town?" "He was my father." Understanding dawned in Flynn's expression, followed by sympathy. "I heard about his passing. I'm sorry. I met him once, about 3 years back. He helped me out when I was in a tight spot, gave me a meal and some advice without asking for anything in return. He was a good man." The casual kindness of this stranger acknowledging her father's character loosened something in Hannah's chest. "He was. Too good sometimes, too trusting." The train whistle sounded in the distance, and they both looked toward the tracks where smoke was visible on the horizon. Flynn shifted his saddlebags, preparing to stand. "What kind of work are you looking for in Sacramento?" Hannah asked suddenly, an idea forming before she could fully think it through. "Anything honest. I've done ranch work, cattle drives, horse breaking, some carpentry. I'm not particular, just need steady wages." The train was pulling into the station now, brakes screeching, steam hissing. Hannah made a decision that was probably foolish but felt right in a way she couldn't explain. "I need help at my ranch," she said quickly, before she could reconsider. "I have cattle that need moving to market, horses that need breaking, fences and buildings that need repair. I can't pay much right now, just room and board and a percentage of whatever profit we make, but if you're looking for work And I'm desperate for help. Maybe we could come to an arrangement. Flynn's eyebrows rose. You're offering me a job? You don't know anything about me except that I get into fights. You said my father helped you once. That's a recommendation enough. He was a good judge of character. She stood as the train doors opened, passengers beginning to board. And frankly, I'm in no position to be choosy. I need someone with skill and muscle, and you need work. We can work out the details on the ride if you're interested. He stood as well, studying her with an intensity that made her feel exposed, as if he could see past her confident words to the desperation beneath. Why Sacramento if you need help at the ranch? Because I need to negotiate with cattle buyers, try to secure a good enough price that I can convince a bank to extend credit. The Yuba City Bank already turned me down. Because you're a woman. It wasn't a question, and the matter-of-fact way he said it without judgment or condescension caught her off guard. Yes. Flynn looked at the train, then back at her, then at his saddlebags. She could see him calculating, weighing options. What if we don't go to Sacramento? He said slowly. What if I come back to your ranch right now and we start working on making your signature worth something? I don't understand. You said you need to move cattle and break horses and do repairs. Every day you spend trying to negotiate with bankers who won't take you seriously is a day we could be working. Let me help you get things in order, get your assets market ready. Then, when you're ready to sell, you'll be negotiating from a position of strength, not desperation. The train conductor called for final boarding. Hannah looked at the train, thought of the long, uncertain day ahead trying to convince men in Sacramento to take her seriously, then looked at Flynn Wade with his bruised face and honest eyes and crazy suggestion that somehow made perfect sense. My reputation will be ruined if I bring a strange man to live on my ranch, she said. Then I'll sleep in the barn, and we'll make sure someone's always around to chaperone. I'm not here to compromise you, Miss Owens. I'm just offering honest work for honest pay. The train began to move, slowly at first, then gathering speed. Hannah let it go, watching it pull away with her ticket still clutched in her hand. She turned to Flynn and saw something flicker across his face that might have been relief. I have 2 men working for me already. Miguel and his son Carlos, she said. If you cause trouble or don't pull your weight, you'll answer to them as well as me? Fair enough. And the pay really is terrible until we can get the cattle sold. Room and board and 10% of whatever profit we make. I've worked for worse. Then welcome to the Owens Ranch, Mr. Wade. Let's see if we can make my worthless signature worth gold. They rode back to the ranch together, Flynn on his gray gelding and Hannah on her mare. She used the time to explain the full extent of her predicament. The $3,000 debt, the 6-week deadline, the circling vulture that was Clayton Mercer. Flynn listened without interrupting, his face thoughtful. That's a tall order, he said when she finished, but not impossible. The key is going to be speed and efficiency. We can't afford to waste any time. Tell me something I don't know. He glanced at her and she caught the hint of amusement in his eyes. You're not what I expected when you offered me a job. What did you expect? Someone more delicate, I suppose, more helpless. You rode into Yuba City alone before dawn and were ready to go negotiate with cattle buyers in Sacramento without blinking. That takes steel. Steel doesn't mean much when your signature is worth less than the paper it's written on. Then we'll change that, Flynn said simply. We'll make your name mean something they can't ignore. The conviction in his voice sent a strange warmth through her chest. She barely knew this man, had no real reason to trust him beyond her father's long-ago kindness and her own desperate instinct, but something about him felt solid in a way nothing else had since her father died. Miguel and Carlos were mucking out stalls when they arrived. Miguel's expression darkened when he saw Flynn, and his hand moved instinctively to the knife at his belt. Miss Hannah, who's this? This is Flynn Wade. I've hired him to help us get the ranch ready for sale and get the cattle to market. You hired a stranger? Miguel's tone was disapproving. Without asking us? Without checking references? I don't have time for references, Hannah said, dismounting. I need help now. And Mr. Wade needs work. It's mutually beneficial. Carlos stepped forward, his young face skeptical. That's the man who got in the fight yesterday in town. Rick Dawson's telling everyone he's a troublemaker. Rick Dawson is a liar and a thief, Hannah said flatly. If Mr. Wade punched him, I'm sure he deserved it. Now we have 6 weeks to accomplish what should take 6 months. I need all 3 of you working together, not questioning my decisions. Miguel's jaw worked, but he nodded slowly. Your father trusted your judgment. I suppose I should too, but if he causes problems... Then you can throw him off the property yourself, Flynn interrupted, his tone respectful but firm. I'm not here to make trouble, sir. Just to work. The honorific seemed to soften Miguel slightly. What experience do you have with cattle? I've done 3 cattle drives, worked ranches in Colorado and Wyoming before drifting this way. I can break horses, mend fences, doctor sick cattle, and I'm not afraid of hard work. We'll see. Miguel turned back to the stall he'd been cleaning. Barn's got an empty tack room in the back. You can sleep there. Meals are at dawn, noon, and dusk. If you're late, you don't eat. Understood. Hannah showed Flynn to the tack room, which was barely more than a closet with a window, but it had a cot and a place to store his gear. It's not much, she admitted. It's more than I had yesterday, Flynn said, setting down his saddlebags, and it comes with purpose, which is worth more than comfort. She left him to settle in and returned to the house, her mind already racing through everything that needed to happen. They needed to round up the cattle scattered across the north pasture, count them, check their health. They needed to break at least 6 of the wild horses to sell as saddle horses, which would bring better prices than selling them unbroken. They needed to repair the fences along the eastern boundary where Mercer's cattle kept breaking through. They needed to inventory everything sellable and make sure it was in good condition. And somehow, through all of that, she needed to find a way to turn her worthless signature into something that meant gold, something that would make bankers and buyers and men like Clayton Mercer sit up and take notice. That afternoon, Flynn proved his worth immediately. He worked alongside Miguel and Carlos, rounding up the scattered cattle, his horsemanship and roping skills evident. By dusk, they'd gathered nearly 100 head into the main pasture, and Flynn had also spotted 2 cows that needed medical attention, treating their infections with a competence that earned even Miguel's grudging approval. Hannah cooked dinner, a simple meal of beans and cornbread and salt pork, and the 4 of them ate at the kitchen table in her father's house. It felt strange having Flynn there, this near stranger sitting where her father used to sit, but also somehow right, as if the house had been waiting for male energy to balance it again. We've got maybe 120 cattle total, Flynn said, wiping his plate with cornbread. That's good. If we can get them to Sacramento in prime condition, we're looking at maybe $15 to $20 a head. That's $1,800 to $2,400, depending on the market. Still short of $3,000, Carlos pointed out, which is why we need the horses, Hannah said. Those 6 Mustangs in the north pasture, if we can break them proper, they'll bring $75 to $100 each as saddle horses. That's another $400 to $600. Still short, Miguel said quietly. I know. Hannah pushed her food around her plate, but it's a start. And maybe if I can show the bank that I'm actively working to repay, that I have assets ready to sell, they'll extend the deadline. Banks don't work on maybes, Flynn said. They work on guarantees. What you need is someone willing to co-sign, someone whose signature they'll accept. I don't have anyone like that. My father was an only child, my mother's family disowned her when she married him, and I have no other relatives. What about Mercer? Carlos asked me. He wants the ranch. Maybe he'd co-sign if it meant eventually getting the property. He'd co-sign in exchange for me selling to him at his price, Hannah said bitterly, which defeats the entire purpose. Then we don't rely on banks, Flynn said. We sell everything we can as fast as we can, and we pay off the debt directly. It's possible. Difficult, but possible. Miguel stood and began clearing dishes. Tomorrow we start breaking horses. Carlos, you worked with your uncle breaking wild horses, yes? Yes, Papa. Good. You and Mr. Wade will take the lead on that. Miss Hannah and I will work on the cattle, make sure they're healthy and branded proper. We've got 6 weeks. That means we can't afford any accidents or delays. The next morning, Hannah woke before dawn to find Flynn already in the corral, studying the 6 wild mustangs they'd trapped last month. They were beautiful animals, all young and strong, but completely unbroken. Dangerous if handled wrong. She watched him from the kitchen window as she made coffee, noting the careful way he moved, never rushing, always aware of where the horses were. He had a natural grace that came from years of working with animals, a patience that couldn't be taught. "You like him." Hannah jumped, splashing hot coffee on her hand. Miguel stood in the doorway, his expression knowing. "I hired him," she said, grabbing a cloth to wipe up the spill. "That's all." "You watch him the way your mother used to watch your father, like he's something precious you're afraid to break." "That's ridiculous. I just met him." "Your mother knew your father 3 days before she decided she'd marry him," Miguel said softly. "Sometimes the heart knows faster than the head." "My heart isn't involved in any of this," Hannah said firmly, though her cheeks felt warm. "I hired Flynn because I need help, nothing more. There's no room in my life for romance when I'm about to lose everything." Miguel smiled slightly. "If you say so, Miss Hannah." But his words lingered as she went about her morning chores, as she worked alongside Flynn and Carlos and Miguel through the long, hot days that followed. She told herself the flutter in her chest when Flynn smiled at her was just gratitude. The way she found herself watching him work, admiring the strength in his arms and the gentleness in his hands when he worked with the horses, that was just appreciation for his skill. The conversations they fell into during the few quiet moments they managed to steal, talking about everything from their childhoods to their dreams to their fears, that was just 2 people getting to know each other as colleagues. But she couldn't deny the shift happening inside her, subtle as morning light but just as undeniable. 2 weeks into Flynn's employment, they'd made remarkable progress. 3 of the horses were broken enough to ride, though still green. The cattle were rounded up, healthy, and properly branded. The fences were repaired. Flynn had even fixed the barn roof, which had been leaking for months. But they were still desperately short of the money they needed, and time was running out. Hannah rode into Yuba City to check on selling some of their excess equipment, leaving the men working at the ranch. The equipment dealer offered her insulting prices, barely a third of what she knew the items were worth, but when she tried to negotiate, he simply shrugged. "That's my offer, take it or leave it. You need the money more than I need your equipment." She left without selling anything, fury and helplessness warring in her chest. This was the same story everywhere. Because she was a woman, because she was desperate, because her signature meant nothing, everyone felt entitled to cheat her. She was heading back to her horse when she saw Clayton Mercer walking toward her, his expensive clothes and confident stride parting the crowd like Moses with the Red Sea. "Miss Owens, ici," he called out, his voice carrying false warmth. "I'd heard you were in town. Do you have a moment?" She wanted to refuse, but Mercer was a powerful man in Yuba City, and antagonizing him further would only make things harder. "Mr. Mercer." "I understand you've hired some help at your ranch," he said, falling into step beside her. "A drifter named Wade?" "I've hired a skilled ranch hand, yes." "I'd be careful if I were you. I've made inquiries about Mr. Wade. Seems he has something of a reputation for violence, got run out of Colorado for killing a man." Hannah stopped walking, her heart suddenly pounding. "That's a serious accusation." "Just passing along what I've heard." Mercer's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'd hate to see you put yourself in danger, Miss Owens. A woman alone with a violent man miles from town, well, anything could happen." "Thank you for your concern," Hannah said coldly, "but I can take care of myself." "Can you?" Mercer stepped closer, his bulk intimidating. "Your deadline is approaching, Miss Owens. End of August, that's just 4 weeks away now. My offer still stands. Sell to me and you'll walk away with enough to start fresh somewhere else. Otherwise, you're going to lose everything to the bank, and then I'll buy it for even less, and you'll get nothing." "I'll take my chances." "Pride is expensive," Mercer said, "and you're running out of money to afford it." She pushed past him and mounted her horse, her hands shaking with anger and something darker, something that tasted like fear. Could the rumors about Flynn be true? She brought a dangerous man into her home. She rode hard back to the ranch, her mind churning. She wanted to dismiss Mercer's words as lies meant to unsettle her. But what if there was truth in them? What did she actually know about Flynn Wade beyond the few weeks he'd worked for her? She found him in the corral with one of the newly broken horses, working it through basic commands. Carlos and Miguel were on the far side of the property checking fence lines. Flynn looked up as she approached, his smile fading when he saw her expression. What happened? Hannah dismounted and tied her horse to the fence rail. I ran into Clayton Mercer in town. He said you killed a man in Colorado. Is that true? Flynn's entire body went still, his face shuddering. The horse sensed the change in him and danced nervously. He gentled it automatically, his hands steady, even as something dark moved behind his eyes. Yes, he said quietly. It's true. The simple admission hit her like a physical blow. You killed someone. In self-defense, Flynn said, his voice careful, controlled. His name was Samuel Morrison. He was a ranch owner who didn't like being told no when he made unwanted advances toward a woman who worked in town. When I intervened, he drew on me. I was faster. You shot him. I did. Flynn's jaw tightened. The sheriff ruled it self-defense. There were witnesses. But Morrison was a wealthy man with powerful friends, and I was just a drifter. They couldn't convict me legally, so they made it clear I should leave Colorado or face accidents that no sheriff would investigate. So I left. Hannah's mind raced, trying to reconcile this information with the man she'd come to know. Why didn't you tell me? Because people hear you killed someone and they don't wait to hear the reasons why. They just assume you're dangerous, violent, someone to avoid. I needed work, and you were kind enough to offer it. I didn't want to give you a reason to withdraw that offer. That's not your decision to make, Hannah said, anger flaring. I deserved to know who I was bringing onto my property. You're right. Flynn tied off the horse and stepped out of the corral, facing her fully. I should have told you from the start. I was a coward, and I'm sorry. If you want me to leave, I'll go. I won't cause you any more trouble. He started toward the barn, and Hannah watched him go, conflicting emotions tearing her apart. He'd lied by omission, kept something crucial from her. But he'd also worked harder than any man she'd known, treated her with respect, proven his worth a dozen times over. And the story he'd told, defending a woman from unwanted advances, that aligned with everything she'd observed about his character. Wait, she called out. Flynn stopped but didn't turn around. Hannah walked to him, her heart pounding. Did you do anything to be ashamed of? Anything you regret? Only that I wasn't fast enough to wound instead of kill, Flynn said quietly. Morrison was an evil man who hurt a lot of people, but I still took a life. That's not something I carry lightly. Do you have a temper? Are you violent? Now he did turn, and the look in his blue eyes was raw and honest. I have a temper when I see injustice, when I see the strong preying on the weak. I'll fight when I have to, but I don't seek it out. I'm not proud of the man I killed, Miss Owens, but I'd do it again if it meant protecting someone who couldn't protect themselves. If that makes me too dangerous to keep around, I understand. Hannah studied his face, searching for deception and finding only weary honesty. She thought about the past 2 weeks, how he'd worked tirelessly, how he'd treated her with unfailing respect, how he'd been gentle with the horses and patient with Carlos, and earned Miguel's grudging approval. She thought about how safe she felt around him, how his presence had made the impossible seem achievable. Stay, she said softly. I trust my judgment more than I trust Clayton Mercer's gossip. You've proven yourself here. That's what matters. Relief flooded Flynn's expression, so profound it was almost painful to witness. Thank you. But no more secrets, Hannah said firmly. If we're going to save this ranch, I need to be able to trust you completely. No more secrets, Flynn agreed. You have my word. They stood there in the dusty yard, the afternoon sun beating down, and something shifted between them. Something that went beyond employer and employee, beyond strangers helping each other out of mutual need. Hannah felt it like a physical pull, drawing her toward this complicated man with his troubled past and honest eyes. "We should get back to work," she said, breaking the moment before it could deepen into something she wasn't ready to name. "Yes, madam." But as they returned to their separate tasks, Hannah caught herself glancing toward him repeatedly, her earlier anger replaced by a confused tangle of emotions she didn't have time to examine. That evening, after dinner, Flynn found her in the barn checking on a mare that was close to foaling. The sun had set, leaving the world painted in shades of purple and gold, and the barn was full of comfortable animal sounds and the sweet smell of hay. "I wanted to thank you again," Flynn said, leaning against the stall door, "for giving me a second chance. Most people wouldn't have." "Most people are fool, Hannah said, running her hand along the mare's swollen belly. "They judge based on rumors instead of character." "The rumors are true, though." "The facts are true. The rumors make you out to be some kind of monster. Facts just make you human." She looked up at him. "Flawed, maybe, but human. That's more than I can say for men like Mercer who hide their cruelty behind respectability." Flynn smiled slightly. "Your father was right about you." "You said you only met him once. What did he tell you?" "It was 3 years ago, like I mentioned. I was passing through down to my last dollar, hungry and tired. Your father found me fixing a broken wheel on my wagon outside town. He helped me fix it, then invited me back here for dinner. Your mother had already passed, and it was just you and him. You were busy with something in the barn, but he talked about you the whole meal, said you were smart as a whip and twice as tough, that you could run the ranch as well as any man if people would just give you a chance." Tears pricked Hannah's eyes. "He said that?" "He did. He was proud of you. Said raising you was the best thing he'd ever done with his life." Flynn's voice was gentle. "I think he'd be proud of how you're fighting for this place, Miss Owens. Not many people would have your courage." "Courage doesn't pay debts," Hannah said, wiping at her eyes. "We're still short at least $1,000 even if everything goes perfectly." "Then we'll find a way to make up the difference. We've got 4 weeks left. A lot can happen in 4 weeks." The mare shifted, bumping Hannah's shoulder, and Flynn reached out instinctively to steady her. His hand landed on her arm, warm and strong, and for a moment they stood frozen, acutely aware of the contact. Hannah's breath caught. She could smell leather and horse, and something distinctly masculine, could feel the heat radiating from Flynn's body in the cool evening air. "I should go," Flynn said, but he didn't move, didn't drop his hand from her arm. "Yes," Hannah agreed, but she didn't step back. They stood there in the golden half-light of the barn, balanced on the edge of something neither of them was quite ready to name. Then the mare whinnied, breaking the spell, and they stepped apart simultaneously. "Good night, Miss Owens," Flynn said, his voice rough. "Hannah," she corrected softly, "after everything, I think you've earned the right to call me Hannah." Something flared in his eyes, bright and fierce. "Good night, Hannah." He left the barn, and Hannah sagged against the stall door, her heart racing. This was dangerous territory. She couldn't afford to develop feelings for Flynn Wade, not when her entire future was uncertain, not when he was just a drifter who'd probably move on once the ranch was saved or lost. Romance was a luxury she couldn't afford, but her heart, it seemed, hadn't gotten the message. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of back-breaking work and growing connection. The cattle were ready for market, the horses mostly broken, the ranch in better shape than it had been in years. But the financial picture remained grim. Even with everything they could sell, they'd still be short about $800. Hannah lay awake nights trying to solve the puzzle, running through scenarios until her head ached. She could ask for personal loans from neighbors, but most were struggling themselves in the dry summer. She could try other banks, but without collateral beyond the ranch itself, which was already mortgaged, no one would lend to her. She could swallow her pride and accept Mercer's offer, but the thought made her physically ill. "You're going to think yourself into an early grave," Flynn said one evening, finding her on the porch long after everyone else had gone to bed. He sat down beside her on the steps without asking permission, and she found she didn't mind. "I'm trying to find a solution that doesn't exist," Hannah admitted. "Math doesn't lie. We're going to come up short." Maybe we're thinking about this wrong, Flynn said slowly. You've been focused on paying off the debt, but what if we focused on making your signature worth something instead? I don't follow. The problem isn't just the money. It's that no one takes you seriously as a businesswoman because you're a woman. Your signature, your word, your contracts, none of it carries weight. But what if we change that? What if we made your name synonymous with quality, with reliability, with something people wanted to associate with? Hannah turned to look at him, seeing the intensity in his face as he worked through the idea. How would we do that? We take the cattle to Sacramento ourselves, but we don't just sell them at auction. We find the best restaurants, the finest hotels, and we sell directly to them. We guarantee the quality of the meat. Put your name on it, the Owens Ranch brand becomes known for excellence. Same with the horses. We find buyers who want trained horses, and we demonstrate what these animals can do, show that an Owens trained horse is worth premium prices. That's a nice dream, but we don't have time to build a reputation. We have just over a week left. We don't need to build it from scratch. We just need to prove it once, make enough of an impression that people remember. And then when you go back to the bank, you're not asking for charity or extension. You're presenting yourself as a successful businesswoman who's made profitable deals and just needs a small amount of capital to maintain operations. That's a completely different proposition. Hope flickered in Hannah's chest. Dangerous and fragile. You really think it could work? I think you're smart and capable, and the only thing holding you back is other people's prejudice. So yes, we make them see past that. We force them to recognize your worth. Flynn's voice dropped, became more intimate. I see it. Miguel and Carlos see it. We just need to make the rest of the world see it too. The way he was looking at her, like she was something remarkable, made Hannah's pulse race. She was acutely aware of how close they were sitting, how alone they were in the darkness, how easy it would be to close the distance between them. Flynn, she said softly, not sure what she was asking for. I know, he replied, just as softly. Bad timing. The worst. When this is over, when the ranch is saved and the debt is paid, I'm going to ask your permission to court you properly, but right now we both need to stay focused. The fact that he'd said when, not if, sent warmth flooding through her. The fact that he was gentleman enough to wait, to prioritize her needs over his wants, made her feelings deepen into something that felt perilously close to love. When this is over, she agreed, I'm going to say yes. Flynn's smile could have lit the entire ranch. He stood and offered his hand to help her up, and when she took it, he held on a moment longer than necessary, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in a gesture that was almost a caress. Get some sleep, Hannah. Tomorrow we start making your signature worth gold. The next morning, they loaded the cattle onto rented rail cars bound for Sacramento, paying premium prices they couldn't afford for transport. Flynn, Hannah, and Carlos traveled with the herd, while Miguel stayed behind to watch the ranch. The journey took 6 hours, and they arrived in Sacramento in the afternoon with 120 head of prime cattle. Instead of heading straight to the stockyards, Flynn directed them to the finest hotel in the city, the Golden Eagle. Hannah's protest died when she saw the determined set of his jaw. Trust me, he said. They tied up the cattle in a lot near the rail yard, and Flynn went into the hotel while Hannah and Carlos waited with growing confusion. He emerged 20 minutes later with a well-dressed man in an expensive suit. Miss Owens, Flynn said, this is Mr. Edmund Sterling, head chef of the Golden Eagle. Mr. Sterling, this is Hannah Owens of the Owens Ranch, and these are her cattle. Sterling walked among the animals with a critical eye, examining their condition, their muscle, their overall health. Hannah held her breath. These are excellent specimens, Ordamor, Sterling said finally. Grass-fed, clearly well cared for. What are you asking? $25 a head, Flynn said before Hannah could speak. Premium quality deserves premium prices. Sterling laughed. The stockyard is selling cattle at $15 a head. The stockyard is selling whatever comes through mixed quality. Miss Owens personally oversees every aspect of raising her cattle. You won't find better beef in California, and she'll guarantee it in writing. If you're not satisfied with the quality of the meat, she'll refund your entire purchase. Hannah's heart hammered. They couldn't afford to refund anything, and Flynn knew it. But she saw what he was doing, saw how he was forcing Sterling to take her seriously by putting everything on the line. That's a bold guarantee, Sterling said, looking at Hannah now with new interest. I stand behind my product, Hannah said, finding her voice. My father spent 20 years developing this herd. I've spent the last month ensuring they're in prime condition. You won't be disappointed, Mr. Sterling. Sterling studied her for a long moment, then nodded. I'll take 20 head at $22 each. If the quality is as good as you claim, I'll buy from you again and recommend you to other establishments. $22 a head. That was $440 from one sale. Hannah wanted to cry with relief, but she kept her expression professional, extending her hand. You have a deal, Mr. Sterling. They shook on it, and Sterling had his people come collect the cattle. As the animals were led away, Sterling paused. For what it's worth, Miss Owens, it's refreshing to do business with someone who has integrity. Your father was known in these parts as an honest man. Seems his daughter inherited that quality. After Sterling left, Hannah turned to Flynn in amazement. How did you know he'd be interested? I didn't, Flynn admitted, but I knew that the best way to get premium prices was to go to premium buyers. People who care about quality will pay for it if you can prove your worth. They repeated the process 3 more times that afternoon, selling cattle to 2 more restaurants and a high-end butcher. By evening, they'd sold 80 head at an average of $21 each, bringing in $1,680. It was more than Hannah had dared hope. The remaining cattle they sold the next day, a mix of private sales and stockyard auction that brought in another $600. With the money from the horses, which Miguel had sold while they were gone, and the equipment they'd managed to move, they'd raised nearly $3,400, more than enough to pay off the debt. Hannah stood outside the bank in Yuba City on the last day of August, the money secure in a locked box, Flynn beside her for moral support. Her hands trembled as she reached for the door. You've got this, Flynn said quietly. Your signature is about to mean everything. They walked in together, and Mr. Hartwell looked up from his desk with surprise that turned to condescension when he saw Hannah. Miss Owens, I'm afraid I have bad news. The deadline is today, and I haven't received— I'm here to pay, Hannah interrupted, setting the box on his desk. The full amount plus interest. Hartwell's eyes widened as she opened the box, revealing stacks of bills. His face went through a rapid series of expressions: shock, disbelief, disappointment, and finally resignation. I see, he said stiffly. Well, this is unexpected. I'll need to count it and process the paperwork. Take your time, Hannah said sweetly. I'll wait. It took an hour to count the money, verify the amounts, and prepare the documents. Through it all, Hannah sat with her spine straight and her head high, Flynn a silent, supportive presence beside her. When Hartwell finally slid the papers across the desk for her signature, his expression was sour. This clears your debt in full, he said. The lien on your property is released. You own the Owens Ranch free and clear. Hannah picked up the pen, and for just a moment she thought about all the times her signature had meant nothing, had been dismissed and devalued and ignored. Then she thought about Flynn's words. We'll make your name mean something they can't ignore. She signed with a flourish, her handwriting bold and clear. Hannah Owens, owner of the Owens Ranch. Is there anything else? She asked Hartwell. No, Miss Owens, that concludes our business. Good. She stood, gathering the papers. But because I won't be doing business with your bank again, any future loans or accounts will be handled by institutions that respect all their customers equally. She walked out with her head high, Flynn following, and it wasn't until they were outside that she let herself feel the full weight of what they'd accomplished. The ranch was saved. Her father's legacy was intact. Her signature had proven its worth. We did it, she said, turning to Flynn with wonder in her voice. When we actually did it. You did it, Flynn corrected. I just helped. You did more than help. You made me believe it was possible. You showed me how to turn worthless paper into gold. She looked at the discharge papers in her hand, at her signature bold and unignorable at the bottom. My name means something now." "It always meant something," Flynn said. "Now other people just recognize it too." They rode back to the ranch in silence, both exhausted but elated. Miguel and Carlos met them at the gate, and when Hannah showed them the discharge papers, Miguel actually smiled, something she'd rarely seen. "Your father would be proud," he said gruffly. That night they celebrated with a simple dinner that felt like a feast. Stories were told. Laughter rang out. And for the first time since her father's death, Hannah felt like the ranch was truly hers, not something she was fighting to keep, but something she'd earned through her own merit. After dinner, as Miguel and Carlos headed to their quarters and the night settled in cool and star-filled, Hannah found Flynn by the corral, watching the horses. "You said when this was over you'd ask permission to court me," she said, joining him at the fence. Flynn turned to her, his expression serious. "I did say that." "Well, it's over. The debt is paid, the ranch is saved. So ask." "Hannah Owens," Flynn said formally, but his eyes held warmth that made her breath catch. "May I have the honor of courting you properly? I know I'm just a drifter with a troubled past, but I'd like the chance to prove I can be more. That I can be the kind of man who deserves someone like you." "You already proved that," Hannah said softly. "You proved it every day for the past 6 weeks. You're not just a drifter, Flynn. You're a good man who's had bad luck. There's a difference." "Is that a yes?" Instead of answering, Hannah stepped closer and kissed him. It was her first kiss, tentative and sweet, and Flynn went very still before his arms came around her, careful and reverent, as if she were something precious. The kiss deepened, and Hannah felt like she was falling, flying, coming home all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Flynn pressed his forehead to hers. "I'm taking that as a yes," he murmured. "Good," Hannah said, laughing, "because you're not getting rid of me now." "Wouldn't dream of it." They stood there under the stars holding each other, and Hannah thought about how much had changed in 6 weeks. She'd gone from desperate and alone to loved and supported. Her signature had gone from worthless to valuable. And she'd found something she hadn't even known she was looking for, a partner who saw her worth even when the world didn't. The next few months passed in a blur of happiness. Flynn stayed on at the ranch, no longer as a hired hand, but as Hannah's partner in every sense of the word. They rebuilt the herd, established new contracts with buyers in Sacramento, and slowly but surely the Owens Ranch became known throughout California as a source of quality cattle and well-trained horses. Hannah's signature appeared on contracts that were honored and respected. Buyers sought her out specifically. Other ranchers, grudgingly at first, began asking her advice. The woman they dismissed as helpless proved herself more capable than most men, and gradually, attitudes shifted. Clayton Mercer tried one last time to acquire the ranch, offering a slightly better price, but Hannah turned him down with cold satisfaction. "My signature is worth more than your money now," she told him. "Find someone else to bully." He left, and she never saw him again in any capacity that mattered. Flynn proposed properly in December, on the 6-month anniversary of the day they'd met at the train station. He did it in the barn where they'd first acknowledged their feelings for each other, dropping to one knee in the hay with a simple gold band he'd saved for months to afford. "I don't have much to offer you except a strong back and a willing heart," he said. "But if you'll have me, I promise to spend every day making sure your signature, your name, your worth is recognized, not because you need me to validate you, but because I want to stand beside you while you show the world what you're capable of." Hannah said yes through happy tears, and they married in January of 1884 in a simple ceremony at the ranch. Miguel walked her down the aisle, in place of her father, and Carlos stood as Flynn's best man. It was small and perfect and exactly what they both wanted. Their wedding certificate bore both their signatures, Flynn Wade and Hannah Owens Wade, equal and binding. The first year of marriage brought challenges as they learned to navigate partnership in both business and life. Flynn had never expected to settle down, and adjusting to permanence took effort. Hannah had spent so long being independent that accepting help sometimes felt like weakness, even when she knew it wasn't. They fought occasionally, the passionate arguments of two strong-willed people, but they always found their way back to each other, always chose love over pride. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Flynn handled the physical labor and horse training while Hannah managed the business side, though they each helped with everything. They hired 3 more ranch hands as they expanded, and Miguel and Carlos became more family than employees. In the fall of 1884, Hannah discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. Her mother had died from complications during childbirth, and the fear of following that same path haunted her nights. Flynn was attentive and protective without being smothering, rubbing her feet when they swelled, holding her hair when morning sickness struck, reading to her from novels in the evenings to distract her from worry. He talked to her belly as it grew, telling their unborn child stories about the ranch, about how brave and strong their mother was, about the legacy they'd inherit. "You're going to know from the very start that your mama's signature means something," Flynn said one evening, his hand spread across her swollen stomach. "That her word is gold and her strength is unmatched. And you're going to know that being a woman doesn't make you weak or less than. You're going to grow up believing you can do anything." "What if it's a boy?" Hannah asked, amused. "Then he'll know to respect women who are smarter and stronger than him," Flynn replied with a grin. "Either way, we're raising someone who understands worth isn't determined by what's between your legs, but what's in your heart and head." Their son was born in May of 1885, a healthy boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's stubborn jaw. They named him John, after Hannah's father, with the middle name Flynn. The birth was difficult, and Hannah understood viscerally why her mother hadn't survived. But she made it through with Flynn holding her hand and refusing to leave her side despite the midwife's scandalized protests. Flynn cried when he held his son for the first time. This hardened cowboy with a violent past standing in their bedroom with tears streaming down his face as he cradled new life. "Thank you," he whispered to Hannah. "Thank you for giving me this. A family, a home, a purpose. I was drifting before I met you, just existing. Now I'm living." Hannah, exhausted and sore but overwhelmingly happy, reached for his hand. "We saved each other. That's what partners do." John Flynn Wade proved to be a healthy, happy baby who grew into a curious toddler. By his 2nd birthday, he was following his father around the ranch, mimicking everything Flynn did. By 4, he could sit a horse with confidence. By 6, he was helping with simple chores and learning to rope. But Hannah made sure he also learned to read and write and do figures, understanding that education was as important as physical skill. She taught him herself in the mornings before ranch work began, the same way her father had taught her. In 1888, Hannah gave birth again, this time to a daughter they named Sarah. The birth was easier, and Sarah proved to be as fierce as her mother from the start, screaming her demands and refusing to be ignored. Flynn doted on her shamelessly, this tiny girl who had him wrapped around her finger from her first breath. 2 years later, another son arrived, Thomas, who was quieter than his siblings but no less determined. And in 1892, they welcomed their final child, a daughter named Catherine. The ranch house, which had once felt empty with just Hannah rattling around in it, now overflowed with noise and life and love. Children ran through the halls, laughter echoed from the kitchen, and the dinner table required extra leaves to accommodate everyone. Flynn never fully lost his wariness of strangers or his quick temper when he witnessed injustice, but fatherhood gentled him in ways Hannah hadn't expected. He was patient with the children's endless questions, creative in finding ways to teach them ranch skills, and absolutely firm about treating everyone with respect regardless of gender or station. "Your mama's signature means something because she made it mean something," he told John one evening when the boy was 10. "She didn't wait for permission or validation. She worked harder than anyone and proved her worth. That's what you do in life, son. You prove yourself through actions, not words." The Owens-Wade Ranch became one of the most successful operations in Northern California. Hannah's business acumen and Flynn's practical skills combined to create something greater than either could have achieved alone. They weathered droughts and economic downturns, adapted to changing markets, and maintained their reputation for quality. Hannah's signature appeared on contracts across the state. When she walked into banks or business meetings, she was treated with respect, her word taken seriously. The woman whose signature had once been worthless was now someone whose endorsement carried weight. But success didn't change who they were at their core. They remained the same hard-working, principled people they'd always been, just with more resources and reach. They paid their employees well, treated them fairly, and helped neighbors when times were tough. The generosity John Owens had shown others was continued through his daughter and son-in-law. Clayton Mercer's ranch failed in 1893, a combination of poor management and drought. When the property came up for auction, Hannah and Flynn bought it, not out of spite, but because the land adjoined theirs, and they could put it to better use. They combined the properties, creating one of the largest ranches in the county, and renamed the whole operation the Owens-Wade Ranch in recognition of the partnership that had built it. Miguel worked for them until he was too old to ride, then stayed on living in a cottage they built specifically for him, respected and cared for as family. Carlos eventually married and took over as foreman, his children growing up alongside John, Sarah, Thomas, and Catherine. The children grew strong and capable, each finding their own path while remaining connected to the ranch. John took over primary management of the cattle operations, showing his mother's head for business and his father's physical capability. Sarah surprised everyone by developing an interest in law, encouraged by her parents even when neighbors thought it scandalous for a woman to pursue such education. Thomas became the ranch's expert horse trainer with a gift for gentling even the wildest Mustang. Catherine, the youngest, proved to be mechanically minded, fascinated by the new farm equipment becoming available, and always figuring out how to improve efficiency. In 1903, on their 20th wedding anniversary, Hannah and Flynn stood on the porch of their house watching the sun set over land they'd fought for and built together. Their children were grown, or nearly so, the ranch was prosperous, and they'd achieved more than either had dreamed possible that desperate July day in 1883. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd gotten on that train?" Flynn asked, his arm around her waist. "Sometimes," Hannah admitted. "I'd probably still be fighting to save the ranch, or I'd have lost it entirely and be working in some Sacramento boarding house. Definitely wouldn't be happy. I'd be drifting somewhere, probably getting into fights and running from my past," Flynn said. "Definitely alone." "Thank goodness for missed trains and desperate decision," Hannah said, leaning into him. "Thank goodness for women whose signatures are worth gold," Flynn replied, kissing her temple. They'd built something remarkable together, not just a successful ranch, but a family, a legacy, a life that mattered. Hannah's signature appeared on the deed to thousands of acres, on contracts worth tens of thousands of dollars, on her children's birth certificates and school records and marriage licenses, but the signature that meant the most to her was the one on their wedding certificate, faded now but still clear: Hannah Owens Wade, wife of Flynn Wade. Equal partners, equal worth. That signature represented everything they'd overcome and everything they'd built. It represented a cowboy who'd seen worth where others saw weakness, and a woman who'd refused to let anyone define her value. It represented love that had transformed two struggling individuals into an unstoppable partnership. Her signature had indeed become worth gold, but not because of money or success or property. It was worth gold because it represented a life well lived, a love well earned, and a legacy that would endure long after the ink faded. Years passed in the comfortable rhythm of ranch life. Hannah and Flynn grew older together, their hair graying, their bodies showing the wear of hard work, but their connection only deepening. They celebrated grandchildren, weathered losses, adapted to changing times. John married a school teacher from Sacramento and gave them 3 grandchildren. Sarah became one of California's first female lawyers, fighting for property rights for women and winning landmark cases that changed state law. Thomas married Carlos's daughter, uniting their families even more closely. Catherine never married but became a successful inventor, holding patents on several pieces of farm equipment that revolutionized ranch efficiency. Miguel passed peacefully in 1910, and they buried him on the ranch beside the plot reserved for themselves. Flynn and Hannah stood at his grave with their children and grandchildren, remembering the man who'd believed in them when belief was scarce. "He saw your worth before anyone else did," Flynn said quietly to Hannah. "He trusted you to run this ranch when everyone else thought you'd fail." "He saw your worth too," Hannah replied. "Gave you a chance when others would have run you off." In 1915, Flynn fell ill with pneumonia. At 62, he'd lived a full life, but Hannah wasn't ready to let him go. She nursed him through the worst of it, sitting by his bedside day and night, their children taking turns keeping vigil. "You have to get better," she told him fiercely one night when his fever was high and his breathing labored. "We're not done yet. We have more grandchildren to meet, more sunsets to watch, more life to live." Flynn's hand found hers, his grip weak but present. "Hannah Owens Wade, the most stubborn woman in California." "That's Hannah Owens Wade, the woman whose signature is worth gold," she corrected. "And you're the man who made it so you have to stay because half my worth comes from having you beside me." "That's not true," Flynn whispered. "Your worth is all your own, always was. I just made sure other people saw it." "Then stay so you can keep making sure they see it," Hannah said, tears streaming down her face. He recovered slowly and incompletely, but he recovered. The pneumonia left him weaker, his breathing never quite right again, but he was alive and present and still Flynn. They adjusted their routine to accommodate his limitations, and life continued. On a warm July evening in 1923, 40 years after they'd first met at the Yuba City train station, Flynn and Hannah sat on their porch watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Flynn was 70 now, Hannah 63. The ranch was being run primarily by John and Thomas, with Catherine handling the business side. They'd earned their rest. "Have I told you lately that meeting you was the best thing that ever happened to me?" Flynn asked, his voice still carrying that rough edge she'd always loved. "Only about 1,000 times," Hannah replied, smiling. "But I never get tired of hearing it." "Good, because I plan to tell you 1,000 more." He took her hand, his thumb rubbing across her knuckles the same way he'd done that first night they'd acknowledged their feelings. "You saved me, Hannah. In every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," Hannah said, the same response she'd given so many times over the years. "That's what love does." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky gold and purple, watching their grandchildren run and play, feeling the weight of years and the lightness of contentment. Flynn passed in his sleep that September, his body finally giving out after a lifetime of hard use. Hannah woke to find him gone, his face peaceful, his hand still holding hers. The grief was staggering, a physical pain that made breathing difficult, but beneath it was gratitude for 40 years of partnership, love, and shared purpose. They buried him beside Miguel, on the land they'd saved together. All their children came, all the grandchildren, friends and neighbors and business associates whose lives had been touched by the cowboy who'd made a desperate woman's signature worth gold. Hannah stood at the grave, her children surrounding her, and thought about that July day in 1883 when she'd walked out of the bank with worthless papers and crushing debt. She thought about Flynn, bruised and weary, offering to help a stranger. She thought about every moment that had led them to this one, every choice that had built the life they'd shared. "Thank you," she whispered to the fresh-turned earth, "for seeing my worth, for making me believe in it, for loving me." She lived another 12 years, remaining sharp and active until the very end. She watched more grandchildren marry, met great-grandchildren, saw Sarah argue a case before the California Supreme Court and win. She saw the ranch continue to prosper under her children's management, saw her legacy secure. When she passed in 1935 at the age of 75, she was buried beside Flynn, their graves marked with simple headstones that read, Hannah Owens Wade, 1860–1935, a woman whose signature was worth gold, and Flynn Wade, 1853–1923, the cowboy who made it so. The ranch continued for generations, the Owens-Wade name becoming synonymous with integrity, quality, and fair dealing. Hannah's story became family legend, told to each new generation, a reminder that worth isn't given but earned, that signatures become valuable through the actions behind them, and that love between true partners can transform the impossible into reality. Her signature had started as worthless ink on paper, dismissed and devalued by a world that didn't believe women could be successful business people. But through determination, intelligence, hard work, and the support of a cowboy who saw her true worth, that signature had become something remarkable. It had represented saved ranches and successful deals, had signed contracts and birth certificates and legal documents that changed laws. But most importantly, it had signed a marriage certificate binding her to Flynn Wade, the partnership that had made everything else possible. That signature, more than any other, had proven its worth in gold, measured not in money, but in love, family, legacy, and a life well lived. In the end, Hannah's signature was worth gold because it represented something invaluable, a woman who refused to be defined by others' limitations, a man who recognized and championed her worth, and the love story that proved two people working together could accomplish anything, including turning worthless paper into the most valuable thing of all, a life filled with purpose, partnership, and enduring love.